Hi, this is our lecture about the endocrine system, particularly the pituitary gland. We'll be looking at the hormones produced by the pituitary gland, and you see that it's just a little gland up here in the brain, right under the hypothalamus. Um, but the hormones it produces affect many of the other glands that you see here. So be sure you've got the glands labeled on your picture on the study guide. Notice that the parathyroid glands are on the back side of the thyroid. Um, Also, just kind of notice how odd this system looks compared to the other systems we've looked at. These glands are not connected to each other. They work by sending their hormones out into the blood, and they travel throughout the body that way. As a matter of fact, it is part of the definition of a hormone to be a substance that's carried through the blood. So that's why they're not connected in any way. They're connected by the bloodstream. The endocrine system is the second of two messenger systems of the body. The first is the nervous system, and we've looked at the nervous system. The nervous system sends messages quickly, and it uses basically electrical signals to do that, right? We looked at the action potential. And the signals from the nervous system are quick and short-lived. Where the endocrine system, they are chemical messages, these hormones that release into the blood and travel throughout the body in the bloodstream, and they cause responses that last much longer but are often slower to begin. So slow and long lasting as opposed to quick and short-lived in the nervous system. Hormones control many, many processes in the body, particularly reproduction, growth and development, mobilization of body defenses, which we'll look at more closely when we look at the immune system. Lots of homeostasis maintenance. And so coordinating with the nervous system, particularly the hypothalamus, to maintain homeostasis throughout the body, and the regulation of metabolism. So we'll see hormones involved in all of these. Hormones are produced by specialized cells within these endocrine glands. Some of the glands, that's all they do, and some of the glands, they have some other jobs as well. But hormones are produced by those cells. They're then secreted into the extracellular fluids, and the blood then picks them up and transfers them to their target sites. When they get there, those hormones regulate the activity of the other cells. Notice that they're secreted just out into the extracellular fluid. That's what makes them endocrine glands as opposed to exocrine glands. Exocrine glands like sweat glands and sebaceous glands secrete their secretions onto a body surface. They have a duct and it exits onto either an internal or external body surface. So these are different. They just sort of seep out and then get picked up by the blood. So throughout this whole unit on the endocrine system, be sure you keep these questions in mind. Every time you encounter a hormone, you want to ask yourself, where did it come from? So what gland produced it? Where does it go? What is the target? And what does it do when it gets there? What does it make that target cell, target organ do? Now, if you're in AP biology, you've added another layer, and that is how does it do it, right? We looked at in AP Bio, you looked at signal transduction. Here in anatomy, we're going to really be focusing on this aspect of the hormones, and it's kind of nice if you can then tie that together if you've learned about the how as well. So here's a picture kind of showing that process. Here's the secreting cell that would be in the endocrine gland. The blue circles represent the hormone. The hormone is secreted out into the extracellular, intracellular space between the cells and the blood vessels. These are just little tiny capillaries. The hormone gets picked up in the bloodstream. It's going to what's not shown here is those capillaries run into larger and larger blood vessels. This can go all over the body. Exits the capillaries in the same way, just sort of diffuses through the capillary walls. And what you'll notice here about the target cells is they have a receptor. So the hormone can only affect cells that have a receptor. So that's why these hormones can travel all over the whole body, and some of them only have very, very specific targets. Some of them have more general targets, but some have very specific targets. And what makes a cell a target for a particular hormone is that it has a receptor for that hormone. Endocrine glands are going to release their hormones when that gland is told to, either by another hormone, which is what we're going to see is particularly the job of the pituitary hormones, is to go and tell another gland to make a hormone. The gland may detect changing blood levels of certain substances, either detect changing blood levels of the hormone, or, like in the case of the parathyroid, detecting calcium levels. Or it could be stimulated by a nerve signal. So we do have communication between the nervous system and the endocrine system. This is particularly happening, in the hypothalamus. All right, so now let's focus on the pituitary gland. So remember, that's up inside the brain. You saw it in the sheep brain dissection. In humans, about the size of a grape, a small grape probably, hangs by a stalk from the hypothalamus. So it is an extension of the hypothalamus. And it's sort of nestled really tightly in the sphenoid bone. And it is so tight, it's sitting so tightly in that bone that any type of tumor or growth on the pituitary gland is really dramatically impactful, because there's just no room for it, and it really hinders its performance. It's got two lobes, and so the anterior in the front, posterior in the back. The anterior pituitary is a gland. Okay, it is actual glandular tissue, and it produces hormones, and it's under the control of the hypothalamus. The posterior pituitary, on the other hand, is actually part of the hypothalamus. So it's nervous tissue. It's connected directly to the hypothalamus. Nerves run from the hypothalamus down into the posterior pituitary. The hormones it releases are actually made in the hypothalamus, not in the posterior pituitary. So it's not technically a gland. So here's a picture. You kind of see here we have the thalamus and hypothalamus, pituitary gland down here hanging off of the hypothalamus. Pineal gland we'll talk about later, and remember you saw that as well in the brain. Here's a little blow up, hypothalamus with the pituitary off of it. If we look a little bit more closely, remember that optic chiasm where the two optic nerves cross, and right behind that we find the pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary, which is an extension of the hypothalamus, and then stuck on the front of it is this anterior pituitary, which is an endocrine gland. And notice here's that sphenoid bone. There's this little indentation in the sphenoid bone that just sort of nestles the pituitary gland in there to protect it. So if you look at your chart, you have 8 hormones listed. 6 of them are from the anterior pituitary, and that's where we're going to start. So there's growth hormone, prolactin, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, thyrotropic hormone or TSH, and adrenocorticotropic hormone or ACTH. You find a lot of hormones get initials, and we tend to refer them by that. Especially adrenocorticotropic hormone takes a while to say. So GH, FSH, LH, TSH, ACTH will generally be referred to that way. So we're going to go through these one by one and take a look at where they come from, which is all the anterior pituitary. So that's not a key part of your chart. Just remember that they're all coming from the anterior pituitary, but we do want to know where they go and what they're going to make happen when they get there. So growth hormone is sort of a general metabolic hormone, and it does just what it sounds like it does. It directs the muscles and the long bones to grow. Okay? More specifically, it's causing amino acids to be built into protein. So it's kind of upregulating transcription and translation, right? It also causes fats to be broken down, so we've got a source of energy for all of that protein synthesis that's going on. So this is going to, particularly in childhood and adolescence, cause the growth of bones and muscles, and is less of a factor later in life. Prolactin is a rather specific hormone. It specifically stimulates and maintains milk production following childbirth. That's really the only time it's active. It is present at low levels in everyone, including males, and it's not known what it's doing there, but it increases following childbirth and stimulates and maintains milk lactation. Prolactin stimulates lactation. Adrenocorticotropic hormone targets the adrenal cortex, and you'll find that the adrenal gland has two parts, a cortex and a medulla. The cortex is the outer shell of the adrenal gland. Take a look at this name, adrenocortico, so that's the cortex of the adrenal gland, and it is a tropic hormone. We'll look more closely at what that means momentarily. We're going to run into a number of tropic hormones. What it does when it gets to the adrenal cortex is cause the release of the hormone cortisol. Cortex. The adrenal cortex makes cortisol and cortisol is a stress hormone, and cortisol is produced in reaction to biological stress. So adrenocorticotropic hormone is also produced in response to biological stress to go and tell the adrenal cortex to make cortisol. You may sort of wonder as we're going through this, why these convoluted pathways, why not just have this under control of one thing, why this big game of tag, but you'll see that allows for control of these hormones at a much more